The thunder of engines echoed across the shattered landscapes of World War I as the first tanks rumbled slowly over the jagged trenches and mud-filled fields of northern France, initially conceived as a solution to break the stalemate of trench warfare. These armored behemoths were clumsy, slow, and prone to mechanical failure, but their psychological impact on enemy troops was undeniable. Infantry units, accustomed to the static brutality of machine gun fire, now faced a new terror: rolling metal walls that seemed unstoppable. It was the dawn of mechanized warfare, and with it, the race to develop weapons capable of piercing armor had begun. Yet as nations scrambled to improve tank designs, a quiet revolution in anti-tank weaponry was taking shape. The earliest attempts were rudimentary: specialized rifles and small-caliber artillery, rounds that could damage the thinner armor of WWII tanks. These were often ineffective, leaving infantry to rely on luck, ingenuity, or sheer courage to neutralize the armored threat. The battlefield had changed forever, and armies were only beginning to comprehend the deadly interplay between offense and defense. But the real transformation would come in the interwar years, when lessons learned from World War I collided with technological ambition. Engineers experimented with hollow-charged projectiles, high-explosive rounds, and even flamethrowers designed specifically to tackle tanks. As Germany rose from the ashes of the Treaty of Versailles, it secretly poured resources into both armored warfare and anti-tank solutions. By the late 1930s, German researchers had developed the Panzerfaust and the Panzer, revolutionary weapons that allowed infantry to engage tanks at close range with deadly efficiency. The stage was set for a terrifying new kind of war, one in which steel and explosives would dance in a deadly ballet across Europe. You might think that these innovations would guarantee a swift victory for whichever side held the technological advantage, but history would prove otherwise. At the outbreak of World War II, both Axis and Allied powers faced the same daunting reality. Tanks were formidable, but without infantry, artillery, or tactical coordination, they were far from invincible. Early encounters in Poland and France demonstrated that even a small, well-placed team of anti-tank infantry could stall an entire armored column, reshaping the battlefield in unexpected ways. It was a lesson that would reverberate through every engagement of the coming years, where strategy often mattered more than hardware. By 1940, the Allies were scrambling to counter German innovation. Britain's Piat, projector, infantry, anti-tank, emerged as a response to Panzer dominance. It was awkward, heavy, and dangerous if mishandled. Yet in the hands of a skilled soldier, it could destroy a tank from tens of meters away. The Soviets, meanwhile, developed their own early anti-tank rifles, and improvised weapons emerged across occupied Europe. Soldiers learned quickly that armor could be defeated not only by firepower but also by terrain, timing, and cunning. The battlefield had become a chessboard of steel, each move potentially fatal. Click the subscribe button and like the video. It helps more people see these stories and understand the human ingenuity behind every battle. In the deserts of North Africa, anti-tank ingenuity reached new heights. British infantry, Fosse and Rommel's formidable panzer divisions, devised ambushes in narrow passes and behind sand dunes. Italian-built tanks, German Panzer III, and IVs, all powerful and mobile, suddenly found themselves vulnerable to what seemed like primitive weapons: rifles, mines, and hastily constructed explosive devices. Success depended not on size or strength, but on observation, preparation, and the audacity to strike where the enemy least expected. The psychological impact of anti-tank weapons was as significant as their physical effect. Armored crews became wary, constantly scanning for signs of hidden infantry or explosive traps. A single well-placed shot could immobilize a tank, forcing retreat and panic. Even if the crew survived, soldiers quickly realized that warfare was no longer simply about numbers. It was about anticipation, adaptation, and the ability to exploit technological weaknesses in real time. Meanwhile, German engineers continued their innovations, developing WWII, the explosive anti-tank rounds capable of piercing armor that once seemed invulnerable. Each new advancement forced a response: thicker armor, faster engines, and better coordination. The arms race between tank and anti-tank weapon had begun in earnest. a deadly cycle of measure and countermeasure that would define the European battlefields for the next 5 years. But while the engineers labored in laboratories and factories, it was the soldiers in the mud and sand who wrote the first chapters of armored warfare history. Their improvisation, courage, and tactical brilliance would shape doctrines still studied today, and the lessons of the early anti-tank engagements would echo decades later, influencing conflicts far beyond Europe. Yet, as World War II loomed, a new question arose. Could armies adapt quickly enough to these technological and tactical shifts, or would overconfidence and rigid strategy doom even the most advanced forces? The answer would soon be written in blood, fire, and metal across the battlefields of Poland, France, and beyond. By 1941, Europe had been plunged into chaos. The Sherman Blitzkrieg, literally lightning war, had shattered traditional military expectations. Columns of Panzer tanks, supported by motorized infantry and devastating Luftwaffe air power, swept through Poland, France, and the Low Countries at speeds no one thought possible. The world watched in shock as mechanized warfare redefined the very notion of battlefield dominance. It was a terrifying demonstration of what mobility, coordination, and technological advantage could achieve, but even these highly trained forces were not invincible. At the same time, the Allies faced a sobering realization. Traditional defensive doctrines were insufficient against the fast-moving, coordinated strikes of panzer divisions. Tanks operating without infantry support could advance far, but they were also exposed. At Stalingrad and Tobruk, smaller units learned to exploit the weaknesses of mechanized columns, setting up ambushes in narrow streets or across seemingly impassable terrain. Each encounter revealed the fundamental truth of armored warfare. Speed and firepower could be countered by ingenuity, knowledge of terrain, and tactical patience. Amid the chaos, individual soldiers made dramatic differences. Infantry equipped with anti-tank rifles, bazookas, and captured German Panzerfausts learned to strike at the flanks, rear, or vulnerable underbelly of tanks. A single well-aimed shot could immobilize a vehicle and halt an entire advance, leaving soldiers to wrestle with a dilemma. Should they press forward against unknown defenses, or retreat and risk losing momentum? Entire strategies hinged on these micro-decisions, highlighting that modern warfare was as much a mental contest as a physical one. One striking example occurred in the deserts of North Africa. British forces, though outnumbered in armor, used cunning and terrain mastery to frustrate Rommel's seemingly unstoppable divisions. Mines were buried overnight. Camouflaged trenches offered firing positions, and deceptive maneuvers misled German commanders into sending tanks into kill zones. The Panzers, though technologically superior, suffered repeated ambushes that eroded their morale. It became clear that mechanized might alone could not secure victory. Strategy and preparation were equally decisive. Tactical innovation extended beyond ambushes. The Allies experimented with combat arms coordination, pairing artillery, infantry, and air support to create layered defenses. The concept of the kill zone, where multiple anti-tank units converged on advancing armor, began to emerge. These lessons were costly, often learned through devastating losses, but they laid the groundwork for modern armored doctrine. Officers who had studied textbook maneuvers were forced to adapt in real time, improvising solutions that would sometimes turn the tide of battle. Meanwhile, the Germans, confident in their superior tanks and tactics, were also forced to innovate. They introduced the Tiger I, a heavy tank with thick armor and powerful 88mm guns, capable of destroying enemy vehicles at unprecedented range. Panzer divisions combined shock, speed, and firepower in ways that demanded constant vigilance from defenders. Yet even the Tiger, a symbol of technological supremacy, could be brought down by ambushes, mines, or the sheer unpredictability of battlefield conditions. The larger lesson was clear. Technological superiority alone could never guarantee victory. In the Eastern Front, lessons were even more brutal. The vastness of the Soviet Union allowed for maneuver warfare on a scale previously unimaginable. German panzer groups penetrated deep into enemy territory, but long supply lines and fierce, improvised Soviet resistance slowed their progress. Infantry with anti-tank weapons, often poorly supplied but highly motivated, set up defenses in villages, forests, and riverside crossings, turning the terrain into a weapon in itself. The front lines were fluid, but the interplay between mobility and defense defined the struggle. And yet, For all the tactical brilliance displayed by both sides, a deeper question loomed. Could the Allies develop sufficient doctrine, coordination, and firepower to counter German innovation on multiple fronts? Or would the Blitzkrieg model continue to dictate the pace and shape of the war? The coming years would reveal the answer in blood-soaked campaigns from North Africa to the vast plains of the Soviet Union. Across all theaters, one truth emerged with relentless clarity. Armored warfare demanded adaptation at every level. Individual soldiers, engineers, and commanders alike had to respond to evolving threats, often relying on improvisation, observation, and audacity to survive. Speed, firepower, and armor were essential, but without clever tactics, they could become liabilities rather than advantages. By late 1943, the cumulative lessons of early armored engagements began to crystallize into doctrine that would shape future battles. Yet even as both sides learned from their victories and failures, the battlefield remained unpredictable. Ambushes could appear where none were expected, weather could halt the fastest tanks, and a single heroic act could shift the balance of an entire engagement. It was a brutal, unforgiving education in the nature of modern warfare, where technological might and human ingenuity were inseparable. Armored warfare had arrived in full force, and its lessons would echo far beyond World War II, influencing the strategies and weapons of every conflict that followed. By 1943, the nature of the war had shifted. The lightning-fast blitzkrieg that had stunned Europe was giving way to slower, grueling battles, especially on the Eastern Front. The vast plains and forests of the Soviet Union became arenas for positional warfare, where armored thrusts met deeply entrenched defenses. At the Battle of Kursk, the largest tank engagement in history, hundreds of tanks clashed across a front stretching dozens of kilometers. Yet despite the overwhelming firepower, success hinged on more than steel and engines. It depended on coordination, human ingenuity, and the ability to exploit terrain. Infantry units, long seen as supporting actors in the age of mechanized warfare, emerged as decisive players. Engineers laid mines and prepared obstacles. Riflemen targeted weak spots in armor, and artillery units orchestrated devastating barrages against advancing panzers. Soldiers worked together in ways that mirrored modern ATGM teams, where observation, communication, and patience could compensate for inferior numbers or equipment. A single misstep by a tank commander could leave dozens of armored vehicles vulnerable. A lesson learned through bitter experience on fields littered with wreckage. Click the subscribe button and like the video. It helps more people see these lessons and appreciate the human courage and innovation behind every battle. Amid the chaos, acts of improvisation became legendary. At Kursk, Soviet infantry sometimes used captured German weapons to turn enemy firepower against its former owners. Mines hidden beneath seemingly innocuous fields or roadways could immobilize entire tank columns, creating opportunities for counterattacks. Artillery crews learned to coordinate with infantry in real time, adjusting fire to strike advancing armor with lethal precision. Even a single platoon, if positioned cleverly, could delay or redirect a much larger force. Yet victory was never guaranteed. For every clever defense, the attacking force adapted. Panzer commanders experimented with combined-arms tactics, coordinating tanks, infantry, and aircraft to breach fortified lines. Smoke screens, flanking maneuvers, and rapid communication became essential to survive and exploit openings. A single moment of hesitation or miscalculation could turn an attack into a massacre, leaving entire divisions stranded under fire. The war had become a test of nerve, skill, and adaptability, not just technology. In urban and forested settings, the role of infantry became even more pronounced. Tanks were powerful, but in narrow streets or dense woods, they became vulnerable to ambushes. Soviet soldiers learned to fight in tandem, using anti-tank rifles, Molotov cocktails, and improvised explosive devices to halt armored advances. Each encounter was a microcosm of strategy, as commanders balanced risk, observation, and timing to maximize effectiveness. The human element, morale, courage, and quick thinking proved as decisive as any technological advantage. The psychological impact of anti-tank defenses was profound. Tank crews faced constant uncertainty, knowing that danger could come from anywhere. A sniper shot, a concealed mine, or a sudden explosion from a nearby building. The stress of constant vigilance affected decisions, often forcing armored units to retreat or slow their advance, buying precious time for defenders. It was a battlefield shaped not just by firepower but by perception, anticipation, and adaptability. Meanwhile, the Germans, though technologically advanced, faced mounting challenges. Heavy tanks like the Tiger and Panther could dominate in direct combats, but they required extensive maintenance, long supply lines, and careful coordination. Without support from infantry and reconnaissance, even the most formidable tank could be trapped or destroyed. The war revealed that technological superiority could be neutralized by strategy, terrain, and the ingenuity of determined defenders. As winter approached, both sides confronted the harsh realities of positional warfare. Supply shortages, extreme weather, and the sheer exhaustion of continuous combat tested commanders and soldiers alike. Anti-tank tactics evolved further, with layered defenses, rapid redeployment, and intricate coordination between units. The lessons of these battles would influence military doctrine for decades, demonstrating that adaptability and integration of forces were as crucial as raw firepower. Yet even with extensive preparation, uncertainty remained. A single unexpected maneuver, weather shift, or courageous action could tip the balance. Armored units could be caught off guard, infantry outflanked, and entire strategies disrupted. In these moments, the war revealed its ultimate truth. Technology could shape battles, but human ingenuity, decision-making, and adaptability defined victory. In the end, the positional warfare of 1943-1944 showed that even smaller, less equipped forces could resist a numerically or technologically superior enemy through coordination, observation, and tactical creativity. The stage was set for the final phases of the war, where lessons learned from years of tank battles, ambushes, and improvisation would determine the fate of armies, cities, and nations. By 1944, the war had entered its final, decisive phase. Tanks and anti-tank weapons had evolved into highly specialized instruments of destruction, reflecting years of brutal experimentation, adaptation, and human ingenuity. The Allies were advancing on multiple fronts. American and British forces pushed through France after D. The Red Army pressed westward across Eastern Europe, and every advance carried the lessons of years of armored warfare. Yet, the battlefield remained unpredictable, a crucible where technology alone could not secure victory. The German Tiger and Panther tanks, symbols of mechanical superiority, faced increasingly effective Allied anti-tank measures. The Allies had perfected shape-charge explosives, portable anti-tank weapons, and integrated artillery tactics that could neutralize even the heaviest armor. Mines and ambushes were meticulously coordinated, and infantry units learned to exploit every weakness. Flanks, tracks, engine compartments. For the first time, the interplay of multiple weapon systems, human observation, and tactical acumen created a synergy that outmatched raw firepower. In urban combat, tanks were particularly vulnerable. Narrow streets, rubble-strewn avenues, and hidden firing positions allowed small groups of infantry to destroy vehicles that might otherwise have dominated open battlefields. In cities like Cannes and Budapest, close-quarter engagements turned tanks into expensive but fragile tools, where clever positioning, explosives, and patience were more effective than a larger arsenal. Commanders on both sides had to balance aggressive maneuvers with caution, knowing that one miscalculation could result in catastrophic losses. Meanwhile, the Allies increasingly embraced combined arms strategies. Infantry, armor, artillery, and air support operated in seamless coordination, reflecting lessons learned from years of bitter combat. Infantry units, now well-trained and equipped with modern anti-tank weapons, could engage armored threats from multiple angles. Tanks, artillery, and engineers worked together to clear obstacles and secure positions, while reconnaissance teams relayed crucial intelligence. Victory depended not merely on what weapons were deployed, but on how effectively they were integrated into a coordinated plan. The psychological impact of these advancements was profound. German tank crews, once confident in their armored supremacy, faced uncertainty at every turn. Every road, bridge, and village could conceal a deadly threat. The Allies, conversely, gained confidence from understanding the mechanics of armored warfare, knowing that careful planning, observation, and coordination could allow smaller forces to hold off or destroy seemingly superior enemies. These experiences would influence military strategy for decades, laying the foundation for post-war doctrine. But innovation did not stop with conventional weaponry. Improvisation continued to play a decisive role. Soldiers used captured weapons, improvised explosives, and clever deception to exploit enemy weaknesses. Artillery barrages were coordinated with infantry advances to maximize effect, and supply logistics were refined to ensure that anti-tank weapons could reach the front lines at the critical moment. These human-centered strategies proved that ingenuity and adaptability often mattered more than the latest model of tank or gun. As the war drew to a close in 1945, the lessons of armored and anti-tank warfare became painfully clear. Technology could shift the balance of a battle, but victory required integration, preparation, and strategic insight. The innovations pioneered during the conflict ship-charged munitions, portable anti-tank weapons, combined arms tactics set the stage for modern warfare, influencing conflicts from Korea to Ukraine decades later. The idea that smaller, determined forces could resist a larger mechanized enemy became a recurring theme in military history, emphasizing that human ingenuity could amplify or negate technological advantage. In retrospect, World War II's armored battles were more than a contest of tanks and weapons. They were a testament to human adaptability and tactical brilliance under extreme conditions. Armies that combined intelligence, observation, coordination, and improvisation consistently outperformed those relying solely on raw firepower. Anti-tank weapons, from early rifles to portable explosives, became not just tools of destruction but instruments that shaped strategy, morale, and battlefield psychology. The final victory underscored the enduring principle that technology influences war, but humans define it. The interplay between weapons, strategy, and human skill demonstrated that battles are won not by machines alone, but by those who wield them wisely. Tanks and anti-tank systems, once symbols of dominance, became part of a larger, integrated approach to combat that emphasized foresight, adaptability, and coordinated action. World War II left a legacy of innovation and tactical evolution, proving that warfare is never static. Each new weapon prompted new strategies. Each battlefield offered new lessons, and each soldier contributed to an ongoing story of human courage, creativity, and resilience. The era of mechanized warfare had matured, and its principles continue to resonate in modern conflicts, reminding us that ingenuity and preparation remain the ultimate weapons of war.